next topic, and I talked about this player last week with the guys from the Pin Down, Blake Silverwin and West Davenport. We're talking about Devin Booker, right? So Devin Booker, obviously, in the Phoenix Suns, I think we could both agree that they've had a season where probably not up to their expectations. And Bovado, who is a sports book, had their odds for Devin Booker's next team if it's not with the Phoenix Suns if they decide to blow it up. And what would you look at that? The Detroit Pistons are the odds-on favorite at plus 800, and you got the Knicks at plus 900, OKC plus 900, and Houston Rockets at plus 950. So I want to get your take on this because I feel like you're a very big Devin Booker fan. Like, what do you kind of make of like the Phoenix Suns this season, and could you possibly see them, trying to maybe trade their franchise guy in Devin Booker?
I think this is a situation where Phoenix, since the KD trade, since Matt Ishbia became their owner, has not met expectations whatsoever. That's a team that, had made a finals run, was really close to a championship at one point, and it looked like the world was just up for them, right? Like Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Devin Booker, Chris Paul, like great young core, DeAndre Ayton. Great young core complemented by one of the greatest point guards of all time. Granted, everybody acknowledged he was getting older. Then at a certain point, it was like, okay, like it looks like they're probably going to need to upgrade, right? Off of Chris Paul and that large contract. It being Kevin Durant on paper didn't necessarily look like a bad fit at first when you had Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton on that team. But everything since that season has screamed new owner syndrome. It has been a NBA 2K rebuild in real life, right? And it has just been weird trade, weird signing, firing a coach, then hiring a new coach, then firing a coach, and now it looks like you're going to fire another coach in hopes of maybe saving the locker room chemistry. And I tried to pay attention to this because I saw the Suns game in person when they came to Detroit this season, and that bench had zero life to it whatsoever. And I had been hearing things all season about how bad that locker room is and how they kind of brought in Mike Budenholzer as like a last-ditch effort to kind of save the locker room because they thought maybe Frank Vogel wasn't doing a great job. And I feel like it's pretty obvious if you just watch the body language. Like I've always been a body language enthusiast sounds really weird, but I mean, like I think it's really important to
Pause.
yeah, pause. But it's really important to watch the body language when you start hearing things about like teams' locker room chemistry or certain like things going wrong. It's always important to watch that, and the body language has not lied, right? Like they look like they don't necessarily all get along. They look like they don't necessarily believe that they are a championship level team. And it shows. And I feel like the Bradley Beal situation at the deadline screamed, this is not going well at all. And we're really trying to trade Bradley Beal. And then you'd hear Bradley Beal's agent go, well, we're not budging on our no trade clause. We haven't been approached on anything. And, that ultimately went nowhere. So when you have something like that happen at the deadline, that they're really desperate to save this situation. And then it comes out that they try to trade Kevin Durant without telling Kevin Durant. This is headed for a really nasty offseason, right? I think that is not an insane thing to say. Once, and I don't think this is like an if, once Kevin Durant gets traded, where does that leave Devin Booker and the Phoenix Suns, right? Because you're stuck with Bradley Beal, who I don't think he's been offensively bad, but in no way, shape, or form is he worth the $50 million plus the no trade clause. And that kind of really handicaps what you're able to do because they also drained their asset pool for Kevin Durant. You're in a no-win situation, right? And at a certain point, you kind of have to make a decision of, okay, what's right for us? And I don't think the Phoenix Suns on their own would look to trade Devin Booker. But I do think Devin Booker reaching this stage in his career now, seeing other players around the league get moved without, like a Luka Doncic, right? Like get moved without ever wanting out, thinking he was going to spend his entire career there. I think loyalty is a really heavy word, and it meant a lot, but right now I don't know if it necessarily means as much. And I know they've been doing damage control like crazy, saying Devin Booker's committed to the franchise and he's not going to leave. But at the same time, like, what do you expect him to say, right? Like, what do you expect his representatives to say? What do you? This is 101 damage control, and I really feel like there's going to be a point where they don't make the playoff run that they expect to make, right? Like if they even make it. And Kevin Durant gets traded, because I don't think that's an if. I think Devin Booker goes, well, okay, well, what's next for me? And I think he definitely looks at a Detroit Pistons and sees the situation of, this is a team that he wanted to get drafted by. Like, this is no secret. He desperately wanted to be drafted by the Detroit Pistons. He is a very proud Michigander. He reps Detroit in everything that he does. And it also just so happens that the season where he might start looking elsewhere, his hometown team seems like they're ready to make that next step. It seems like they're a serious basketball team. And it also seems like they're a team that could really benefit from having a second superstar. All I'm saying is, if the time comes this summer where Devin Booker is going to start exploring his options, I would not be surprised if the Pistons not only are on that list, but also anticipate being on that list.
Yeah, it's very intriguing to me the way his career has kind of unfolded in Phoenix. Obviously, not winning a whole lot until Chris Paul and Monty Williams got there. They make the finals. They decide to move on from Monty. I can't even remember who their coach was. I want to say Frank Vogel, it might have been.
Yep.
Frank Vogel, which I still think Frank Vogel's a good coach. I didn't really think he could really do anything. And to your point, I think you talked about it last time you were on, with the body language with the Phoenix Suns when they were here in Detroit. Like, that was a bench that no one was really up and clapping. No one was really up and celebrating one another or cheering for each other. It was a bench that looked very toxic. They were obviously still doing their job and playing basketball, but I don't think there's a lot of people in that locker room that like each other. And it's kind of funny. Like, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are very close. Like, any type of shoot around, they're always together. And Bradley Beal kind of seems like the odd man out, just from like my vantage point and my point of view. But that KD trade, and then I think the Bradley Beal trade, in my opinion, was kind of over the top. I didn't really feel like they needed a Bradley Beal because I thought they had an okay bench. They just needed to add some more pieces in a point guard, but I think they kind of went overkill. And to your point, I think Matt Ishbia does have that new owner syndrome where he thinks that he needs to spend the most to win a championship. And we've seen, franchises that have tried to, build these super teams, they're usually left with nothing. Like, the Cleveland Cavaliers are a perfect example when LeBron was there. Look how long it took them to rebuild and just gain assets and be competitive to where they're at now. It took them several years to get to that point. But I think you make a very good point as well in terms of, obviously, Devin Booker is going to be looking at the landscape. He's going to looking at his, his peers, top shooting guards in the league. And he may look at it and say, like, these are my 4 teams that I'm interested in going to. Trade me to one of these teams. And I think the Pistons would be on his list. So we see it every time he comes to, LCA. He's got Lions gear on, Red Wings gear. Like, obviously, grew up in Grand Rapids, likes being here, likes supporting his hometown teams. And I think that's why a lot of Pistons fans gravitate towards him as a player. But the whole Phoenix situation is just really messy. And I agree with you. I think it's just going to be just fireworks this summer. Like, it's going to be so toxic. Like, I kind of feel bad for Shams Charania because I know that's all he's going to probably be tweeting about this summer is just the Suns this, the Suns that, the Suns this. But I know there's a lot of fans that are kind of on the fence. They're 50-50 if they do want a Devin Booker. I think my only question would be is like, what would it cost to get him? Because I'm sure it's not cheap. There's a report that they wanted 4 first-round picks, which I think they could get, but it just really depends like what team is like really in that conversation, you know?
I think it also gets to a point where the Suns will have to prioritize kind of, do we want to best optimize what we want in the trade, or do we want to do right by the guy who stayed through pretty much everything, right? I think the best optimizing of all the asset pool in terms of first round picks would be like a Houston, right? But if it's doing right by your superstar whom you've had for a decade plus, and someone who's stuck through some shit that most people wouldn't have stuck through, then I think it's sending him to Detroit. If that is truly like what he wants the most, I think that would be probably the best move. Now, what does that mean for Detroit in that scenario? That's a bridge I guess you kind of have to cross. But if and when they do make the playoffs, that first round pick pool does kind of open up, and they're open to trade first round picks now. That means they can do straight up sending a 2026, or can they? Yeah, or 2027 unprotected, 2029 unprotected, 2026 swap, 2028 swap, if that was the goal. But again, it's a bridge they'll have to cross, and we'll see if Booker even goes for 4 first round picks, because I mean, I feel like the landscape of trades is kind of changing, because you're looking at a guy like Luka Doncic get traded for literally 1, although objectively probably the worst trade in NBA history. It still might set a precedent in terms of what players really go for because of the new CBA. First round picks are more valuable than they've ever been, and having a first round pick means having a cheaper contract while also having a higher level role player on your team. So I feel like, I don't think he'll go for 4, but I do think he'll still be expensive in terms of assets.
I do too. I think you always go into these negotiations asking for a lot. Like I remember Danny Ainge this offseason before Lauri Markkanen signed that extension. I think he was asking for like 5 or 6 first round picks and your firstborn grandchild, like something just like crazy.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
the spirit of your oldest ancestor as well.
Literally. I do think though, like for Pistons fans that are watching, like if you kind of look at the landscapes of their contracts, they have a lot of rookie deals, and the guys that they have signed, like Cade and Stu, are the only like real long-term deals. Like you have Simone on a 2-year deal, you have Tobias on a 2-year deal. I think they're setting themselves up to make that big move. I just don't know what that big move is going to be. I think a lot of Pistons fans are very vocal of getting a secondary score next to Cade, kind of like a Batman to his Robin, basically. So like I wouldn't rule out a guy like a Devin Booker at all, because I think there's a lot of ties there, especially within the organization. I know there's a lot of people in the Pistons organization that are very big fans of Devin Booker. And I'm sure Booker would love to be back home, but I don't know if it's going to be for him. It might be for a player that we're not even talking about. Like it could be for Zion. You never know.
Right. Yeah, who I think would be a great fit, at least on court with this team. Like the half court offense, the transition offense with Cade and a Zion 2-man duo would be ridiculous. But that again, like it's going to be a decision they kind of have to make this summer. Is like, are we where we want to be roster wise, or do we want to swing for the fences for that second star? I think that's a bridge they'll have to cross, and I think their playoff performance is really going to be determining kind of what direction they go in.